The teacher held up the quiet black girl's essay in front of the entire classroom and laughed. Not a small laugh, not a private laugh, a loud, sharp laugh that made every student turn and stare. Then she said, "This is what happens when students try to sound smarter than they really are." The classroom went silent. The girl stood frozen beside her desk, her hands trembling, her face burning, while 26 classmates watched her humiliation and said nothing. But less than 1 week later, that same quiet girl would stand in front of the entire school, read the speech her teacher tried to destroy, and force the principal, the school board, and every student in that auditorium to confront a truth they had ignored for years. Before we begin, comment your city and what time it is right now, because this story starts with one cruel teacher humiliating a child in public, but it ends with a school changing forever. Her name was Naomi Carter. She barely spoke above a whisper. She never caused trouble. She never asked for attention. And that was exactly why her teacher thought she could break her in front of everyone. What she didn't know was that Naomi's silence was not weakness. It was preparation. The classroom at Westbridge Preparatory School looked perfect from the outside. Tall windows, bright white walls, expensive wooden desks arranged in clean rows, framed college acceptance posters hanging near the door like trophies. Everything about the room was designed to tell parents one thing: important futures were built here. But inside that classroom, the air had always felt different for Naomi Carter. She was 14 years old, quiet, observant, and careful in the way children become careful when they have learned that being noticed can sometimes become dangerous. She sat in the second row near the window, always with her notebook open, always with her pen ready, always listening more than she spoke. Naomi was not the loudest student. She was not the most popular. She was not the kind of child teachers described as full of personality during parent conferences. But she noticed everything. She noticed which students teachers smiled at before they even raised their hands. She noticed which mistakes were called careless and which mistakes were called unacceptable. She noticed which children were given second chances and which children were treated like their first mistake confirmed something people had already believed. That week, the class had been assigned an essay titled, "The Room I Want to Build." It was supposed to be about leadership, community, and the future. Most students wrote about careers, college dreams, sports teams, businesses they wanted to start, or houses they wanted to own. Naomi wrote about silence. She wrote about classrooms where some students learned early that speaking could cost them more than staying quiet. She wrote about the invisible rules children learn before adults admit those rules exist. She wrote about what it feels like to sit in a room where you are technically included, but never fully protected. She wrote carefully, honestly, and with a kind of clarity that came not from trying to impress anyone, but from telling the truth as precisely as she could. She stayed up past midnight revising every paragraph at the kitchen table while her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, sat nearby folding laundry and pretending not to watch too closely. Evelyn had raised Naomi since she was 6. She knew when the girl was just doing homework and when she was putting a piece of herself onto paper. "That one matters, doesn't it?" Evelyn asked softly. Naomi looked down at the pages. "I think so." Evelyn nodded. "Then don't make it smaller so somebody else feels comfortable reading it." Naomi carried those words with her the next morning when she placed the essay on Ms. Whitmore's desk. Ms. Linda Whitmore had taught English at Westbridge for 18 years. Parents loved her because she sounded polished at school events. Administrators trusted her because her test scores were high. Students feared her because she knew exactly how to embarrass someone without technically breaking a rule. She had a way of smiling before she said something cruel, as if the smile made the cruelty professional. Naomi had seen her do it to other students, a poor boy whose shoes squeaked, a girl with an accent, a student whose mother worked nights and missed conferences. But Naomi had always stayed quiet enough to avoid becoming the center of Ms. Whitmore's attention. Until the essay. 2 days later, Ms. Whitmore returned the essays during third period. The room was unusually warm that morning, and sunlight cut across the classroom floor in bright rectangles, while students whispered and passed notes beneath their desks. Naomi sat quietly with both hands folded over her notebook, waiting for her paper. She had not expected praise. She had learned not to expect too much from teachers who looked at her like she was a question they had already answered incorrectly. But some small part of her hoped Ms. Whitmore might read the essay honestly, might understand it, might at least return it quietly. Instead, Ms. Whitmore stood at the front of the classroom holding Naomi's essay between 2 fingers, not handing it back, holding it up. The room slowly quieted. Naomi felt the shift before she understood it, the same way you feel weather change before the rain starts. Ms. Whitmore looked at the first page, then looked at Naomi, then smiled. "Class," she said, "I want to discuss something important." Several students sat up straighter. Naomi's stomach tightened. Ms. Whitmore gave the paper a small shake. Sometimes students confuse big words with big ideas. A few students laughed uncertainly, not because they understood, but because they sensed permission. Naomi looked down at her desk. Naomi Carter submitted an essay that attempts to discuss silence, race, fairness, institutional bias. Ms. Whitmore paused on the words like they tasted unpleasant. Very ambitious. More students turned toward Naomi now. She could feel their eyes on her face, her hair, her hands, the notebook she was gripping too tightly. Ms. Whitmore continued, "But ambition without maturity often becomes performance." Naomi's face grew hot. She wanted to disappear into the floor. Ms. Whitmore looked back at the essay and read one sentence aloud in a mocking tone. "A room can be full of people and still be empty of courage." Then she laughed, loud enough for the back row to hear clearly. "That is dramatic, isn't it?" The class laughed harder this time. Not everyone. Some students looked uncomfortable. Some looked down. A boy named Marcus, near the back, stopped smiling almost immediately. A girl named Emily put her hand over her mouth, not amused but shocked. Still, nobody said anything. Naomi sat frozen while her words, the words she had written at midnight with her grandmother sitting across the kitchen table, were turned into a joke. Ms. Whitmore lowered the paper slightly. "Naomi, would you like to explain to the class what qualifies you to make these kinds of accusations about classrooms?" The question was a trap, and everyone in the room knew it. Naomi slowly looked up. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "It wasn't an accusation." Ms. Whitmore tilted her head. "Then what was it?" Naomi swallowed. "An observation." A few students shifted in their seats. Ms. Whitmore's smile disappeared. "Observation requires perspective, Naomi. Sometimes young people mistake discomfort for injustice." The sentence landed in the room with a quiet cruelty that felt almost practiced. Naomi lowered her eyes again. Ms. Whitmore placed the essay on her desk, took a red pen, and wrote something across the top. Then she held it up long enough for the front row to see. "Overwritten, emotionally excessive, needs realism." This time, the laughter was smaller, uneasier, because even the students who enjoyed drama could feel that something had gone too far. But still, nobody stopped it. The bell rang 7 minutes later, but Naomi did not move immediately. Students packed their bags around her, chairs scraping across the floor, voices rising again as if the room had permission to become normal now. But nothing felt normal to Naomi. Her essay lay on her desk with red marks across the margins like little wounds. She could still hear Ms. Whitmore's voice reading her sentence like it was something childish. A room can be full of people and still be empty of courage. The worst part was not that the class laughed. It was not even that Ms. Whitmore mocked her. The worst part was how many people had understood it was wrong and still stayed quiet. Marcus walked past Naomi's desk slowly, then stopped like he wanted to say something. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked at the essay, then at Naomi, then down at the floor. "Sorry," he muttered finally, barely audible. Naomi didn't answer. Not because she hated him, because sorry felt too small for what had happened. Emily lingered near the door with her backpack over one shoulder. She looked like she was fighting with herself. Then Ms. Whitmore said from behind her desk, "Emily, you'll be late." Emily flinched and walked out. Naomi carefully folded the essay along the original crease, placed it inside her notebook, and stood. She did not cry in the classroom. She did not cry in the hallway. She did not cry when two girls near the lockers stopped talking as she passed. She kept her face still because she understood something children like Naomi often understand too early. If she cried, people would remember the tears instead of what caused them. She walked to the restroom at the end of the hall, stepped into the last stall, locked the door, and finally let her breathing break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that her chest stopped feeling like it was holding too much weight. In the mirror afterward, she looked at herself for a long time. Her eyes were red, but her face was steady. She washed her hands, even though they were clean. She dried them slowly. Then she opened her notebook and looked at the essay again, overwritten. Emotionally excessive, needs realism. Naomi read the comments twice. Then she turned the page over and wrote one sentence on the blank backside. Maybe realism is what people call the truth when they don't want to hear it. That sentence stayed with her all day. It sat beside her during math. It followed her through lunch. It stood next to her at the bus stop while other students laughed around her like the morning had already become old news. But for Naomi, something had changed. Not loudly, not suddenly. Something had shifted in the quietest part of her. She did not yet know what she would do with the essay. She only knew she was not going to throw it away. That evening, Naomi placed the essay on the kitchen table without saying a word. Her grandmother was making tea, moving carefully around the small kitchen in the apartment they had lived in for 8 years. The apartment was modest, warm, filled with books, old photographs, and the steady smell of lemon soap Evelyn used on every surface because she said a clean home gave the spirit a place to rest. Naomi sat down and slid the essay across the table. Evelyn looked at her face first. Not the paper, her face. That was how Naomi knew she had already understood more than Naomi wanted to explain. "Read it?" Evelyn asked. Naomi nodded. Evelyn sat across from her, unfolded the pages, and began reading. She read slowly, no rushing, no interruptions. Her eyes moved carefully across each line while the tea kettle clicked softly on the stove. Naomi watched her grandmother's expression change in small ways. A tightening around the mouth, a pause near the second page, a breath held longer than usual at the final paragraph. When Evelyn finished, she did not speak immediately. She placed one hand flat on the paper as if keeping it from being taken away. Then she looked at the red marks. Who wrote these? Ms. Whitmore? Evelyn's eyes moved over the teacher's comments. Overwritten, emotionally excessive, needs realism. Something in her face hardened, but her voice stayed quiet. And Did she say this privately? Naomi looked down. In class? Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Not in weakness, in restraint. She read part of it out loud, Naomi continued. People laughed. Evelyn opened her eyes again. Did anyone speak up? Naomi shook her head. A few looked like they wanted to. Evelyn leaned back slowly. Wanting to do right is not the same as doing it. The words were not angry. That made them heavier. Naomi swallowed. Maybe she's right. Maybe it was too much. Evelyn pushed the essay gently back toward Naomi. No. One word. Firm. Final. This is not too much. This is what happens when a child tells the truth in a room full of adults who prefer decoration. Naomi looked at her grandmother. Something in her chest loosened, but only slightly. Evelyn tapped the page. This line here, about rooms being empty of courage. That is not a child trying to sound grown. That is a child seeing clearly. Naomi's eyes filled again, and this time she did not fight it as hard. Evelyn reached across the table and held her hand. What do you want to do? Naomi shook her head. I don't know. Then don't decide tonight, Evelyn said. But do not let shame make the decision for you. Later that night, after Evelyn went to bed, Naomi sat alone at the kitchen table with the essay in front of her and opened her laptop. Westbridge's annual student assembly was scheduled for Friday. Every year, one student from each grade was chosen to give a short speech about leadership. Naomi had not applied. She would never have applied. But that night, she opened the school website and stared at the submission form for a long time. The deadline had been extended because not enough students had submitted speeches. Naomi placed her fingers on the keyboard. She copied the first line of her essay into the form. A room can be full of people and still be empty of courage. Then she stopped. Her hands trembled. She almost closed the laptop. Then she heard her grandmother's voice in her memory. Do not let shame make the decision for you. Naomi submitted the speech at 11:47 p.m. The next morning, Naomi expected nothing to happen. She expected the submission to disappear into some office inbox and quietly die there. But by second period, the guidance counselor called her name over the intercom and asked her to report to the main office. The entire classroom turned toward her. Naomi's heart began beating hard before she even stood. Ms. Whitmore, who was sitting at her desk grading papers, looked up slowly. Their eyes met for one brief second. Something like recognition passed across the teacher's face, not guilt, calculation. Naomi walked to the office with her hands cold at her sides. The main office smelled like printer paper and coffee. Behind the front desk, two secretaries spoke in low voices and stopped when Naomi entered. Principal Richard Harlan stood near his office door, holding a printed copy of her speech. He was a polished man in his 50s who knew how to sound concerned without ever sounding responsible. Naomi, he said gently, come in. Inside the office, the assistant principal was already seated. So was Ms. Whitmore. Naomi froze for half a second when she saw her. The teacher sat with perfect posture, legs crossed, hands folded, face calm. The printed speech lay on the desk between them like evidence. Principal Harlan gestured toward a chair. Please sit. Naomi sat. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then the principal smiled carefully. First, I want to say your writing is very strong. Ms. Whitmore's face did not move. However, he continued, we have some concerns about whether this speech is appropriate for Friday's assembly. Naomi's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. Why? The assistant principal leaned forward. The assembly is meant to be uplifting. Naomi looked at the speech. It is uplifting, Ms. Whitmore finally spoke. Naomi, the concern is that your piece could make some students and staff feel accused. Naomi turned to her slowly. It's about silence. Ms. Whitmore gave a small smile. Exactly. The room went quiet. Principal Harlan cleared his throat. We're not saying you can't speak. We're simply suggesting revisions. He slid the paper toward her. Certain lines had been highlighted, the strongest lines, the honest lines, the lines that made the speech matter. Maybe remove references to classrooms failing students, he said. And the part about adults protecting comfort more than children, that could be misinterpreted. Naomi looked at the highlighted pages. Suddenly she understood. The school did not want to silence her completely. That would look bad. They wanted to make her truth harmless. They wanted to keep the shape of her courage while removing the weight of it. She looked up. If I take those parts out, it isn't my speech anymore. Ms. Whitmore sighed softly. Sometimes maturity means understanding audience. Naomi looked directly at her. Sometimes maturity means telling the truth anyway. The assistant principal looked down quickly. Principal Harlan's smile tightened. Naomi, we want to support you. Then let me read it. Silence. This time it was not classroom silence. It was administrative silence. The kind that measures risk. The kind that asks how much truth can be allowed before it becomes inconvenient. Principal Harlan folded his hands. We'll review it again and let you know. Naomi stood, picked up her speech, and walked out of the office. As the door closed behind her, she heard Ms. Whitmore say softly, This is exactly the emotional excess I was talking about. Naomi stopped in the hallway. For 1 second, she almost turned around. Instead, she kept walking. But this time, she was not walking away from something. She was walking toward it. By lunch, almost everyone knew something had happened. Westbridge was the kind of school where rumors traveled faster than announcements, especially when teachers tried to hide them. Naomi sat alone at the end of a cafeteria table with her lunch untouched. She could feel people looking, some with curiosity, some with sympathy, some with the awkward discomfort of people who had laughed 2 days earlier, and were now trying to decide whether they were the kind of person who would have laughed if they had understood the moment properly. Marcus was the first one to sit across from her. He placed his tray down quietly and didn't speak right away. Naomi looked at him. You don't have to sit here. I know. Silence. Then Marcus took a breath. I should have said something. Naomi looked down at her lunch. You said sorry. That's not the same. She looked up again. He looked ashamed, but he did not look like he wanted her to comfort him for it. That mattered. Ms. Whitmore was wrong, he said. The class knew it. I knew it. I just didn't want her turning on me next. Naomi absorbed that. It hurt, but it was honest. Before she could answer, Emily sat down beside Marcus. Then another student, Jordan, from the back row. Then a girl named Priya, who had never spoken much to Naomi before. Within 5 minutes, 6 students were sitting at the table. Nobody was loud. Nobody made a dramatic speech. They simply sat there, awkward and serious, like people arriving late to a place they should have been earlier. Emily pulled out her phone. I recorded part of it, she said quietly. Naomi froze. What? Emily looked nervous. I didn't post it. I didn't know what to do. But when Ms. Whitmore started reading your essay, I recorded because, I don't know, it felt wrong. She turned the phone around. The video was only 43 seconds long, but it was enough. Ms. Whitmore's voice was clear. The mocking tone, the laughter, the line about trying to sound smarter. Naomi watched only 10 seconds before looking away. Marcus muttered, "That's worse than I remembered." Priya leaned forward. "If they try to stop your speech, we should say something." Naomi looked at them. "To who?" "Everyone," Emily said. Her voice shook, but she didn't lower it. "The assembly is Friday. If they don't let you speak, we ask why." Naomi stared at the table. For the first time since the humiliation, she was not alone inside it. That did not erase what happened, but it changed the shape of it. Across the cafeteria, Ms. Whitmore stood near the teacher lunch area, watching the table from a distance. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes had changed. The silence she had depended on was beginning to crack. Friday morning arrived with the entire school packed into the auditorium beneath high stage lights and banners reading "Leadership Through Character." Students filled every row, teachers stood along the walls, parents sat in the back section beside members of the school board. Principal Harlan moved through the program with polished calm, smiling between speeches, clapping at exactly the right moments, pretending nothing unusual had happened that week. Naomi sat near the side of the stage, holding her printed speech in both hands. Her grandmother sat in the third row, wearing her church coat and pearl earrings, hands folded over her purse, eyes fixed on Naomi with a steadiness that felt like shelter. Ms. Whitmore stood near the aisle with other teachers, arms crossed, face unreadable. Naomi did not know until that morning whether she would be allowed to speak. At 7:30, Principal Harlan had called her into the hallway and told her they were trusting her judgment. The phrase almost made her laugh. Now, as he approached the microphone, Naomi's mouth went dry. "Our final student speaker," he said, "is 9th grader Naomi Carter." Polite applause filled the auditorium. Naomi stood. The walk to the podium felt longer than it was. Every step seemed to echo. She placed her speech on the stand and looked out at hundreds of faces. Students, teachers, administrators, parents. People who knew pieces of the story and people who knew nothing at all. For one terrible second, her mind went blank. Then she saw her grandmother. Evelyn gave one small nod. Naomi looked down at the first line. Then she began. "A room can be full of people and still be empty of courage." The auditorium quieted instantly. Not normal quiet, real quiet. Naomi continued. "I learned that this week in a classroom where my words were laughed at before they were understood." A visible ripple moved through the teachers along the wall. Principal Harlan's face tightened. Ms. Whitmore went completely still. Naomi's voice shook slightly, but it did not break. "I used to think silence was just the absence of sound, but I know now that silence can be a decision. It can be protection for the powerful. It can be permission for cruelty. It can be the thing that makes a room unsafe even when nobody is touching you." Students in the middle rows stopped whispering. Several leaned forward. Naomi looked up from the paper now. When someone is humiliated in public, the person doing it is not the only one creating the wound. Everyone who watches and decides not to act adds something to it. Maybe not loudly, maybe not intentionally, but silence has weight. I know because I stood inside it. The auditorium was completely still. No one coughed, no one moved. "This school teaches leadership," Naomi said. "But leadership cannot only mean winning awards, getting into college, or standing on a stage when people are already clapping for you. Leadership is what you do in the uncomfortable moment before applause. It is what you do when someone with less power is being treated unfairly and your voice could cost you comfort. It is deciding before that moment arrives that your courage belongs to more than just yourself. In the third row, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Marcus lowered his head. Emily wiped her cheek. Naomi took one breath. I am not giving this speech because I am brave all the time. I am giving it because I was hurt, and for a while I thought the hurt meant I should become smaller. But my grandmother told me not to let shame make decisions for me. So I am standing here because I want to build a room where the next quiet girl does not have to become powerful before people decide she deserves protection. The final sentence landed across the auditorium like something everyone felt at once. Naomi looked at the last line on the page. A school does not change because it says it values character. It changes when the people inside it choose courage while it still costs something. Then she stepped back from the microphone. For 3 seconds, nobody clapped. The silence was too full, too stunned, too honest. Then Evelyn Carter stood, slowly, not dramatically, just with the quiet certainty of someone who knew the room needed one person to move first. Her applause echoed through the auditorium. Marcus stood next, then Emily, then Priya, then an entire row of students. Within seconds, the room was standing not with the wild excitement of a pep rally, but with something heavier. Respect, recognition, shame, relief. Teachers along the wall clapped awkwardly at first, then more fully as they realized the room had shifted without waiting for administrative permission. Principal Harlan stood near the side of the stage with his face pale, clapping in the way people clap when they understand they are no longer controlling the story. Ms. Whitmore did not clap at first. She stood frozen while hundreds of students applauded the girl she had mocked. Then slowly she brought her hands together. Once, twice. But her face carried no triumph, no warmth. Only the look of someone realizing the silence that once protected her had turned into witnesses. After the assembly, students crowded the aisles. Some approached Naomi with apologies. Some simply said, "Thank you." Others could not meet her eyes. Marcus waited until the crowd thinned. "You said what we should have said," he told her. Naomi looked at him softly. "Next time, say it with me." He nodded. That line traveled faster than the speech itself. By the end of the day, students were repeating it in hallways, texting it to friends, posting it beneath clips from the assembly. Emily's recording of Ms. Whitmore humiliating Naomi never came from Naomi. It was shared by another student after school with the caption, "This is what she was responding to." By evening, parents had seen it. By Saturday morning, the school board had received hundreds of emails. By Monday, Westbridge could no longer treat what happened as a misunderstanding between a teacher and a sensitive student. The problem had become larger than Ms. Whitmore. Former students began sending stories. A boy who had been mocked for his stutter. A girl whose essay about poverty had been called dramatic. A student whose accent had been corrected in front of the class until he stopped raising his hand. The pattern was no longer hidden. It had simply been waiting for one voice strong enough to make people look at it. 2 weeks later, Naomi returned to the same classroom where everything had started. Ms. Whitmore was not there. The school had placed her on administrative leave pending investigation after multiple former students submitted written accounts. The substitute teacher greeted Naomi kindly, maybe too kindly, with the careful tone adults use when they know something happened and do not know how close to stand to it. Naomi took her seat by the window. The room looked the same. Same desks, same posters, same sunlight across the floor. But it did not feel the same anymore. The school board announced a review of classroom conduct policies. Student reporting procedures were redesigned so complaints would not disappear quietly into offices. A student witness council was created, not to punish teachers, but to teach students what to do when they saw public humiliation happening in real time. Naomi did not ask for it to be named after her. She did not want that. Instead, the program was called The Courage Room, after a line from her speech. Her grandmother laughed when she heard the name and said, "Sounds like something expensive people came up with after a child told them the truth for free." Naomi smiled for the first time in days. The changes did not fix everything. Naomi knew better than that now. Schools do not become safe because of one speech. Adults do not become accountable because of one standing ovation. Silence does not disappear because people are embarrassed by one video. But something had moved, something measurable, something that gave the next student a place to go, a process to use, and language for what had once only felt like pain. On the last Friday of the semester, Naomi found a folded note inside her locker. It was unsigned. The handwriting was small and careful. It said, "I spoke up today when someone was being laughed at. My voice shook. But I did it. Thank you." Naomi read it twice. Then she placed it inside the same folder where she kept the original essay with Ms. Whitmore's red marks still across the top. She kept the essay not because the humiliation still owned her, but because she wanted to remember the exact place where something began. That afternoon, she walked out of Westbridge beside her grandmother while students moved around them beneath the pale winter light. Evelyn looked over. "You all right?" Naomi thought about the classroom, the laughter, the silence, the stage, the applause, the note. Then she nodded. "I think so." Evelyn smiled. "Good, but don't stop writing." Naomi looked ahead at the school doors opening and closing behind her. "I won't." And for the first time in a long time, the quiet girl was not quiet because she was afraid. She was quiet because she was listening carefully to the world she had already begun to change.